This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to...
This is Nos Arietes.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Ruidiaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is good.
Seattle Sounders, the greatest MLS team in history.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Paul can't say it's cheap.
You want to win? Let's see on a Sunday, bro.
Good for Seattle!
Welcome back to another edition of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Watson's Counter, and our Substack subscribers. This is episode 386, and we're recording on Monday, April 24th, 2023. I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is Mark Kastner, as Aaron Campo is traveling. Coming out of a week that was pretty darn depressing and only seemed to get worse as it wore on, the Sounders put together a workmanlike win that should calm any lingering concerns that this season was poised to go off the rails. A quick recap. First, they lost 4-1 to the Timbers, collapsing in a way we've never really seen. Then on Wednesday, Raul Ruidiaz went down with yet another hamstring injury. That night, Jordan Morris played 88 minutes for the U.S. national team in an ultimately meaningless friendly that effectively meant he wasn't going to start against the Sounders or start for the Sounders on Saturday. And then on Saturday, the day of the game, we found out that Nouhou was a last-minute scratch due to some migraines. And through about 75 minutes, the Loons made life pretty difficult, setting up shop in a mid-block and refusing the Sounders any sort of transition opportunities. But rather than get over-anxious or settle for a tie, the Sounders found a bit of magic through Freddie Montero and a perfectly hit shot from Albert Rusnak to secure 3 points. So, Mark, what do you make of all this?
Well, first, I'm happy to be the Kellen Rowe of the Nos Arietes Cinematic Universe.
Good callback.
Can play many positions. But yeah, I mean, I kind of wrote about this a little bit for Sounder at Heart and the 5 Things post, but it's just not at the end of the season, regardless of what happens, if the Sounders go on and win all 4 trophies they're playing for and have a historic season, we're not going to remember this. Or if for whatever reason, the season does at some point end up going off the rails and ending in kind of failure or whatever, it's just not going to be a remarkable game in any way. Which in a weird way, makes me really excited because it's felt like a few years since the Sounders would win games like this without kind of doing the whole, comparing it to last season thing, even back in like 2021 and all the way kind of back to 2019, the Sounders would routinely win really boring games and we wouldn't think a lot about them. That just hasn't happened in almost 2 years.
Yeah.
A little bit more than 2 years actually. And so it's kind of cool. It's kind of exciting that it does kind of feel like that, things can go poorly, really poorly, as kind of the last 10 or so days have for the Sounders. And they can still pick up 3 points against a team they should comfortably beat, even without 4 or 5 guys that have been in starting lineups before.
Yeah, and I've come back to this. I've repeated this stat a few times, but, the Sounders had this insanely bad record in 1-goal games last year. They went 7-15-5. And that works out to less than a point per game when they're in a close contest. And so every time they win one of these close contests, or it's sort of a tick on the mark of like, yes, this is more about what we expect. And at some point, and maybe this is the last time we end up referencing that stat or last year, but but you sort of have to get to that point where it does feel like the tide has turned. And this did feel like one of those games where, last year it would not have been hard to imagine it being 0-0 in the 75th minute, and the Sounders have dominated possession. There hasn't been a lot of chances either way, but you could see them maybe overextending themselves and pushing forward in a way that exposes them in the back, and they give up a cheap goal, or maybe more likely they just play out 0-0 and that's how it goes. But Freddie Montero had an absolute, I think this didn't get enough attention at the time. Fairly, a lot of the attention went to Albert Rusnak or the defense or whatever. But Freddie Montero came into the game. He didn't do a lot, but the one play he made was an absolutely gorgeous volley where he has a defender literally on his back. He's got 5 defenders all around him. He somehow sees Albert Rusnak out of the corner of his eye and just redirects a throw in right to the top of the box, where Rusnak is able to step into it from perfectly in stride and beat Dane St. Clair with a just a great shot. And it's that kind of stuff that we don't need Freddie Montero to score 10 goals. We don't need him to be a playmaker. But if he can do that little stuff every now and then in the box, that's perfect.
Yeah. I don't actually think he saw Albert.
You just think he put it into space?
No, I thought he saw Nico Lodero's run. And we talked about this a little bit on Twitter after the game, but Lodero's run on the goal is just that's the stuff dreams are made of. You cannot coach that into a player. He effectively, I think Montero's playing, I think he's playing Lodero the ball. And if Lodero really wanted it, he could have got to it, but he holds his run just a little bit. And so the defender that would have ended up stepping to Rusnak at the top of the box freezes. And then the defender that is with Lodero that was kind of tracking his run just stays with Lodero, and it just completely opens up the shooting lane for Rusnak. Or he saw Rusnak and it worked out well. But to kind of the credit, I should say, I'm not trying to downplay anything Freddie Montero did, because I thought he played pretty well in his cameo that he had on Saturday. It's just kind of you have the quality there with this team when your third choice forward is the franchise leading goal scorer, or was at one point. And he can just be cool, I can play 30 minutes and do that still. So
yeah, I thought it was another good example of how deep this team is. Last week they lost Josh Atencio, they lost Christian Roldan, and then this week they added Raul Ruidiaz, Nouhou, and effectively Jordan Morris to the list of players who weren't available to start. And no, I wouldn't say that they didn't miss a beat. I think some of those players' presences would have been very helpful in this game, but they were very competent. I thought Kellen Rowe finding out that he's going to be starting just a few hours before kickoff is a pretty good example of how this team is able to roll with changes. I guess Nouhou was the other player that I failed to mention that was unavailable, but Rowe didn't have a spectacular game, but he didn't make any big mistakes. And that's sometimes exactly what you need from a emergency left back, right?
Yeah, I think what was really interesting about Kellen Rowe's effectively substitute appearance, even though he played for 90 minutes, he found out very soon before the game started. So he's subbing in. They didn't plan to have Kellen Rowe playing that position all week. What's really interesting about his performance on Saturday night that kind of shows me that in just a week's time, the Sounders learned a bunch of lessons from that Portland game was he played that position. This is the second time he started at left back for the Sounders. He played that position exactly, or kind of in a store brand version of Nouhou.
Yeah.
They did not revert to like playing with a typical attacking left back like Rowe played at fullback last year. He kind of held that third defender position. He sat deeper in possession. And I thought that the players that were stand-ins in the Portland game kind of reverted back to an old way of the Sounders playing. For instance, Jordan Morris did not play right mid like Christian Roldan did. He played right mid like Jordan Morris would, and that just opened up a ton of space, and Portland obviously exploited that in the second half. And I like just every role was so much clearer, even with the absences. Kellen Rowe, I thought that that the Sounders were missing Nouhou more than any other player, mostly because Minnesota was totally happy to have all three defenders or four defenders, I guess, if you count Alex Roldan. But Kellen Rowe got a lot of the ball, and he doesn't have the ability to kind of drive into midfield like Nouhou does, or beat his man off of a dribble like Nouhou does. I think if Nouhou plays, they probably score 2 or 3 more goals than they did, just from kind of that situation. But, I even thought so for instance, Obed Vargas started his second game, and because the shape had so much more structure to it against Minnesota than it did against Portland, he was so much more comfortable.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
What did you think of so at halftime, Brian Schmetzer swapped Rusnak and Vargas. What did you, and I guess the idea there was that he wanted Vargas to maybe stretch the defense a little bit and get, try to get in behind. I don't know how effective that worked. I don't know if the explicit goal was achieved, but it did seem to loosen up the defense. It did seem like there was a little bit more space in the second half.
Yeah, and I think what that change did a really good job of was oftentimes when we think about a substitution, we think about the substitution in the player coming on for a different player and doing perhaps different things than the player that started the game. But actually what has to happen is the 10 other players on the field, or 9 other players, or 8 other players, depending on how many subs you're doing at once, they also have to adapt to what's happening when that player comes on. So for instance, Jordan Morris coming on for Obed Vargas isn't just that 1-for-1 change, right? It's everybody else has to get used to really quickly playing with Jordan Morris coming on in that position. And I think doing that swap really early in the second half allowed the rest of the team to know what to expect. I don't think the expectation was for Obed Vargas to, I thought, in particular for that 15 minutes or whatever, I thought Obed Vargas' pressing and kind of his his activity on the right flank was really good. But I think that switch in the second half was more about telling the rest of the team, hey, this is what you're supposed to expect when Jordan Morris comes on, more than it is about putting Obed Vargas or even Albert Rusnak in a better position. Although I do think the latter was accomplished because Rusnak was able to play more centrally, and he's just so much better there.
Yeah, I also wonder, I was trying to sort of get an answer out of this. I didn't get a good answer from anyone, but I also wondered if Rusnak being in that position for an additional, 10 or 15 minutes, whatever it was that he had to be there, actually helped with his positioning on the goal as well, just because it was, they were already sort of expecting him to be in that space, I suppose. And that's not necessarily a shot that I imagine them setting up for Obed as an example. But
yeah, absolutely.
It might be over giving too much credit, but still it worked out. It ultimately worked out. I also thought it was notable that the defense quietly put together another sort of suffocating performance. This is the 5th time this year that the Sounders have allowed less than a full goal of expected goals. In fact, I think all 5 of those games they've allowed 0.6 or less. What's remarkable is, again, not to lean too heavily into the last year, but just for context purposes, the defense last year only did that 6 times where they allowed under a goal of XG, and they just seem to be ruthlessly putting together these shutdown performances on defense, and that might be the single most encouraging thing that's come out of this team, is that, especially last year, I felt like the defense just did not really play up to the standard that they'd set in previous years. And we've often talked about how the Sounders weren't hard to beat in the way that they have been in the past, and this year they seem to have really gotten back to that, and that I think speaks also to the to their ability to win close games, is that they're not just giving up these brain dead goals that they had sometimes given up last year.
Yeah, and it also it was encouraging because that like disastrous 20 minutes in Portland was just a disastrous 20 minutes.
Right.
And even like when you have a young player like Jackson Reagan, I was really worried that, that Portland debacle would like either mean he went to the bench or Reagan went, or Yamar went to the bench and Ariagi, like I was kind of thinking like maybe something would change there. But the kind of mental fortitude that the defense was able to kind of just put that past them and deal with it. Like ostensibly, I don't think Minnesota's attack is that much worse than Portland's. It's kind of funny to say because Portland's attack put up 4 goals in 21 minutes last week, but that's just kind of a weird thing. They did the same exact things that Minnesota was trying to do. I think Minnesota's very like tactically limited, and their talent wise is like a huge gap, but I don't think they're that much worse.
Well, statistically, they're almost exactly the same. They have posted the exact same number of expected goals through 9 games, or through. They actually are on a per 90 basis. They're actually a better team than Portland on a XG basis. So, like, I think there's a lot of relevancy to what you're saying. Is my point. Yeah,
I've seen a lot of sort of like the people in kind of the national blogosphere just be like, oh, it's Minnesota.
Right.
Of course. But yeah, Minnesota has its challenges, both from a coaching standpoint, from a player personnel standpoint, and just sort of like a setup. But they're going to make the playoffs this year, I think. And, they're fine. And they tried to do similar things that Portland tried to do, and they just weren't successful at it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So, moving into some other areas here, I don't know how close. I know you're in Minnesota. I think we've mentioned that before. You were have jokingly called this the Kastner Cup, but I don't know how. I don't know if you have your finger on the pulse enough to answer this question. But I have to imagine Adrian Heath he just sees Sounders on the schedule and just starts weeping.
Maybe he used to. I don't know if he does anymore. I think he just sees it like a mountain he can't climb.
It's just like he just chalks it up. There's not even an emotional attachment to it anymore. He's all out of tears.
It's been a long time since I've gone rock climbing, but I used to dabble in college. And, there's like the different rock climbing courses set up at the climbing gym.
Mm-hmm.
And the one all the way to the right is the one that nobody does because it's too hard. Or like the super fit 130 pound ripped dude that can use his toes like fingers type of thing. I think that's what Adrian Heath thinks that the Sounders are.
Certainly playing in Seattle. I mean, he's 0-8 or 0-9, I think, in his career in Seattle.
Yeah. That's true because
he lost one.
Yeah, Orlando. I was going to say that was I think, yeah. It's tough. Like I think all the emotion left after the 2020 Western Conference Final. I just think that happens to you, and it's that's all she wrote. It's over.
Yeah, it's been Brian Schmetzer in the post game sort of made a joke about how like we can't just keep this streak up against Minnesota forever. So there's always this concern that it's just going to catch up to you. And like I'm a like one of the great fallacies in the gambling world is the do line, which is just like you bet a team because they can't keep playing this badly, right? And thing about that is that you lose a lot of money before you eventually hit. And so hopefully Adrian's got a few more years left in him on that negativity. But one of the big sort of like, I don't know if existential is too big, but one of the big overarching questions coming out of this week was with Raul Ruidiaz. It was revealed that he has yet another hamstring injury. I don't think we talked about this on the show last week because it happened after we recorded, but this is now, I think, the 7th time September of 2021 that he has missed at least one game with a muscle injury. And, I don't want to get too deep into how the Sounders solve this in the long term, but in the short term, we saw Hebert start this game. Obviously, Jordan Morris has filled in admirably in the past. What did you think of Hebert, and what do you hope we see for at least as long as Ruidiaz is out?
I think that there was like a lot of negativity around Hebert's performance that I'm not going to really buy into. Like you have in the notes here, like, yeah, he was a little rusty because he hadn't started or really played very much since he came back from his own injury. And what I was looking for the stand-in players against Minnesota, and this was even before I knew Kellen Rowe was playing, like particularly we had a pretty good idea Hebert was going to play. We had a pretty good idea Obed Vargas was going to play.
Yeah.
I wanted to just see the idea, the sort of like, what's the overall goal here? And I think that was accomplished in like really holding the shape and really kind of having those methodical attacking patterns that we've come to expect from this kind of new tactical tweak this season. And I thought that was there. He was playing as kind of like a little bit more of like a reserved forward, really close to where Ladera was playing. And the idea was kind of like maybe knock the ball off of him, get it to Ladera. Ladera plays it in behind the chew, and you kind of go from there. And I thought that was fine. Like I would give it a passing grade. I wasn't impressed. I wasn't disappointed. I was just sort of fine. And I guess it doesn't help that literally the player he substituted off for got the assist on the game-winning goal. But I'm not sitting here being like, well, I would like to see Freddie Montero start.
Right.
I think they'll probably go back to the kind of the Chu Morris thing in the kind of near term. But I'm like really fine with Hebert, which is like a really like fence-sitting answer. I know.
Well, I think it's a fine answer, but the Sounders do still have some interesting options. I know this week it felt like, wow, they sort of like got to the bottom of their how many of these players am I comfortable starting a game with? And I think that this is maybe the game where they were maybe like I don't think anyone in an ideal world wants to see Kellen Rowe starting, although like we said, he did a fine job. But even assuming Christian Roldan's back, you almost have to assume Morris moves to the number 9 just because that's sort of keeps all these key players on the field. But I think if Roldan's not available this week, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that we're going to see Hebert, Morris, and Chu. But there's I think a reasonable debate to say like, well, should Rusnak stay out on the right and maybe you play Josh Atencio if he's available? Maybe I don't think Obed Vargas is quite at that stage, but maybe he is. So there's, I guess my point is that there's still like questions within this starting group.
Yeah. And I think they're mostly positive questions,
right?
I would say.
Yeah,
it would kind of like where we were talking about in the first few weeks of the season, like, oh, we're spoiled for choice. We're not so much spoiled for choice because so many players are injured or kind of going in and out of form. But I would be okay with kind of going back to what the Sounders did at the beginning of the season, where it was Morris on the wing and Roldan on the other wing, with Chu as this kind of like
super sub.
What? Yeah, where I meant to say Hebert, but yeah, Chu would then go to the bench, where Hebert was kind of this roaming focal point, where like the ball would get to him, and then it would get laid off to Roldan, Rusnak, or Ladero, and then they would find Morrison behind. I'd be totally fine with that, especially because the next MLS game, I know there's the Open Cup game, but the next MLS game is against RSL, and that was some of the best attacking soccer we've seen the Sounders play was just a few weeks ago against RSL with that exact setup.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be like really careful with Leo Chu. He's played really well. He's obviously kind of reached this new level and has exceeded expectations. But I think his confidence is really important. And I think you have to pick and choose his spots. He's now gone a few games without an assist or a goal. He's played a lot of minutes. He's never played this much for the Sounders.
Not this consistency, that's for sure.
Yeah, like this amount of he's played more minutes, but not this amount of minutes
over this time.
Short. Yeah. And so I think it's okay if you pull him out of the starting lineup for a little bit and kind of, have him go to the Preki school of attacking that it seems like all these players go to and get better at. And I'm basically like, I think I agree with you. I don't think I would do anything to the attack to bring Jordan Moore or Obed Vargas into the game as a starter, because I think he's just basically been like really fine, which is like really good for a 17-year-old professional soccer player. But I think you have to think about it like you need to get Jordan Morris in his best position, and you need to get Albert Rusnak in his best position, and then you kind of go from there. And then you just kind of figure it out, because those are your two best players right now with how they're playing. So
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Well, I think we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and give a little bit of a mini preview of the Open Cup game that is on Wednesday. And that'll be that. So you're listening to No Study at This, and we'll be right back. Thanks to Watson's Counter for sponsoring this episode. Located in Ballard, Watson's Counter is your neighborhood specialty coffee shop, brunch spot, and now coffee roaster. Sourcing exclusively high-scoring coffees, Watson's Counter has started their coffee roasting project to showcase amazing coffees grown around the world. Their first featured coffee is the beautifully complex washed Ethiopian Odola. Follow them on Instagram at Watson's Counter to keep up with all the upcoming releases, or check out their website at www.watsonscounter.com. Whether you want to stop by for your daily coffee to go or sit down for delicious Korean-inspired brunch, Watson's Counter has got you covered. Welcome back to Nos Arietes. So a bit of a wrinkle this week after a glorious stretch of games where it was just Saturday game, and then we have this nice long week to do whatever, we get into a nice rhythm. It now gets into the kind of chaotic part of the season. Sounders have an Open Cup game on Wednesday. This is I guess technically the earliest the Sounders have ever had to play in the Open Cup. It's ahead of the round. Usually the Sounders enter in the round of 32. This is not called the round of 32. I think it's called the third round because it's actually not 64 teams. I think it's 48 teams in this round, and then a bunch of other MLS teams come in next round. Anyway, the Sounders are hosting San Diego Loyal at Starfire. I think there are still maybe a few tickets left for that game, but if you don't have tickets, chances are you're going to want to watch it on YouTube. I believe it's it's just called BR. It's not called Bleacher Report anymore. Is that right?
I think technically it's BR app.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, it's on their YouTube channel, and it's free. And so you can watch it there. But San Diego Loyal is, contrary to what I've heard countless people say, it's not technically Landon Donovan is not the coach of this team anymore. He is still, it's his team, I suppose, but he is not the coach. But they are having a pretty decent season. They're currently second in the Western Conference in the USL Championship. They're 4-1-2, and this is, I think, a pretty big game for them. I don't know much about their history in the Open Cup, but as you might imagine, they are looking at this as an opportunity to knock off a big MLS team. I don't think a lower division team has ever won a game in the Open Cup at Starfire before. The Sounders have only lost one game technically at this facility in the Open Cup, and that was the infamous red card wedding last year, as I am fond of pointing out, was technically a tie. They lost in the 11th round of the shootout to the San Jose Earthquakes. I had actually kind of forgotten about that, but the goalies, the goalkeepers, it got to the goalkeepers, and Stephen Cleveland had his spot kick saved by Matt Bersagno, who is a former S2 player, and he nailed his. So anyway, that sets the table. Mark, what kind of lineup would you like to see for this game? I mean, that's really the big question is, Brian Schmetzer has talked a lot about how we're taking it more seriously. We were putting more emphasis in this, but do we really think they're going to put out starters for this game? I don't.
I think the Sounders have 13 starters.
Okay.
So 2 of those guys will probably play.
Who do you think is going to play? You
want me to just kind of go through an 11?
Sure. Well, we can each pick 11, and I'll tell you can pick your 11. I'll tell you who I think. If I think there's any changes different, I'll tell you who I think is different.
All right. So it's going to be Cleveland in goal.
Yeah, I think so.
I think Kellen Rowe is either playing left or right back. Arriaga is going to start. AB Sissoko is going to start. And then you can pick 10 different kids to play the other fullback position, but maybe we see RBW there. Maybe we see Ethan Dobelair. But I wouldn't actually be that surprised if Alex Rodon started. I'm just going to kind of put that out there.
Okay.
And then I think Danny Leyva plays, and maybe if Josh Atencio's healthy, he will play. Let's see. I think Freddie Montero is going to play at the 10, and Hebert is going to start at striker. And then you I just wouldn't be surprised if Leo Chu started, and then you pick the other of the kids that I named at fullback play at kind of the other wide area, or Dylan Tevez, because he came on Saturday, so maybe that's a little bit of a tell that he's going to start. Either way, I think I wouldn't be surprised if for instance, if Christian Rolland cleared concussion protocol, if he started. I also wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Morris played.
That it's funny. Morris, I don't think has played in the Open Cup since 2016.
It was in the first round every year, anyways. So
that's part of. That is part of the thing. The Sounders haven't won an Open Cup game since 2017, and that is part of what is driving Schmetzer to say they're going to take it more seriously this year. But I don't I would be shocked if there's more. If I feel 2 is the high end of who the players that we consider starters, and that would be if Josh Atencio is available. I don't know that he's going to be available, so that would be, to me, probably open up the door for a Soda Kitahara to get into the game. I'm pretty sure Tevez is going to start. I don't know what they're going to do at left back. I think that's one of the big questions is how do they handle that, because Rowe is obviously coming off a 90-minute performance. I don't know if they are secure enough in knowing if Nouhou's going to be 90 minutes fit for the weekend. And so you sort of might need Rowe again next weekend. And the thing is, I just don't think the Sounders are going to sacrifice anything for a MLS game in order just to, increase their chances of beating a team they should already have a talent advantage on. But yeah, on the right side, I agree with you. I think Reed Baker Whiting is probably going to get the start there, and I kind of think Dobler will start at right mid above him. And then I don't know who's going to start at the 9, because I think that's another I think Montero probably starts at the 10, but I don't know who starts at the 9. Maybe, I suppose it wouldn't be that crazy if they signed Ethor Bjorgulfsson from Defiance to make an emergency start there. They don't have a lot of 9 options.
He's the guy that's buying Waystar Royko, right?
Right, exactly. He's the guy.
Yeah.
He's the guy. That's a good pull. But yeah, I think this is a chance for Arriaga to get back in. I think it's, we'll probably see Sissoko, but I can't blame the Sounders for not pushing any starters into this game. Although it would be pretty funny to see Jordan Morris get the start just to see, because I don't think he's ever played at Starfire.
For the U23s he did. There's that one photo.
Yeah.
Way back when.
That's probably true. I don't think he's played there for the Sounders, I should say.
Yeah. They have to have bodies to make the bench.
Right.
So,
and that's where I think maybe that's where it is a little different, is that I wouldn't be surprised if some of these guys, some of their starters are available off the bench, which is maybe like a sign that they're taking it more seriously. Because if I remember correctly, last year, their bench didn't even have starters on it.
Yeah. I don't remember, to be honest with you.
No, why should you?
And I think that's fine. I think Jackson Reagan will be on the bench because they literally don't have another center back. He probably won't play.
Yeah, reading between the lines, they showed the locker room speech of Brian Schmetzer after the game, and he was saying how some guys are trying to talk me into letting him play in the Open Cup, and it looked like he was looking at where Jackson Reagan's locker is. And so I think Reagan maybe have been the guy that they were alluding to trying to get into this game. I will say Reagan's game does set up well for a Starfire match. And, I always forget, there's probably a lot of or maybe not a lot, but there's probably some listeners out there who've never been to a game at Starfire. Last year's game at Starfire was the first time, I think, in 5 years they'd played there. And I got to tell you, if you have a chance to go tomorrow, go. It is a really awesome place to watch a game. And I have talked about this, I've written about it, but it is one of these unique experiences in American soccer where it's like seeing an arena style band at a local club. And it's just, everything about it is small time. And I love that about it.
Yeah. If you've never been, I do sort of echo the sentiment that you should go, under kind of the caveat that you should make somebody else drive.
Yeah. I took a train there last year. If you know how you're going to get back, going down on the train is awesome, because it's the next stop from King Station to go to the Tukwila station, and then it's only like a 15 or 20 minute walk, and it's on a nice little pathway.
Yeah, but it is on the Green River, so that's a little spooky.
It's spooky, but nice. It'll be nice out.
If you know your true crime podcast, that's not necessarily the area you want to hang out. Lest the Green River Killer is still on the loose. Yeah, you should definitely go. I think I'm a little jaded about the whole Starfire experience. But that's because, not to date myself or anything, but I was going to games there 10 years ago for the Open Cup.
Yeah, sure.
But I do understand that there are a new generation of fans, and I think it's really cool, especially cool for families, because you can just let your kids
run around,
do whatever you want, whatever they want, because there's literally dozens of soccer fields right there. Maybe not quite literally a dozen, but there's that little play pitch that they always have set up. And
yeah, that's great. It's a great place.
Cool.
I think it's an awesome venue for this kind of thing, and I suppose a day will come where they stopped playing games there, and I'll miss Starfire. I think like, don't get me wrong, I won't ever miss the press box, which is effectively non-existent, and there's definitely some things about that stadium that are silly, but I love how you, like, last year I remember I ran into Wade Weber and Taylor Graham and I think Craig Weibel, and we were just sort of like hanging out in the concourse talking, and that's the kind of thing that doesn't happen at Lumen Field. And you will run, like, there's players oftentimes sitting in the stands watching the game, and they are, and they just do this thing where when they're walking back to the locker room, there's this long line. They sort of have to cut this line through the crowd, and people hang out and get autographs, and a lot of players will hang out and sign and chat, and especially after a win, it's a cool experience. And I would just say try to get out there, and maybe we'll get lucky and there'll be a few games there this year, but you never know when it's going to be their last.
Yeah. Are they still doing like the beer garden thing?
I don't know what the plan is this year, but okay. I think they had one last year, and of course the beer garden is like one of the great Starfire memories. Is Marcus Hahnemann, of course, saved a penalty, went over to the beer garden and traded his jersey for a beer and slammed it on the field, and it's like that's the Starfire experience right there.
Yeah, that happened like 6 feet in front of me, so that was really cool.
Oh, that's
I also, my kind of favorite Starfire story, I'll share two. The first one is I actually left at halftime of the red card wedding.
Nice. Perfect.
Let's just say that day was a very like bad day for me.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I gotta go home. And lo and behold, the vibes ended up going off of the rails. So I'm kind of glad.
Yeah.
So there's that story. And then a second story, the summer after Freddie Montero had his big transfer to Portugal, he came back for a game.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I actually gave him my one of my You'll Never Yacht Alone scarves.
So you're telling me he has a You'll Never Yacht Alone scarf somewhere stashed in his house? Yeah.
Or it's still somewhere in like the bowels of Starfire.
Right, exactly. Because we know
he wore it for the rest of the game. So
was he cold, or what was going on there?
No, I walked by him on because you know how they have the little the little boxes or whatever that the players sit in. And I just walked by him and I said he was just like wearing like a collared shirt, and I was like, Freddie, you need a scarf.
Oh,
and I just like put it on him, and that was that.
That's precious. Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good place to call it. We may, if I can find someone, I may try to drag in a San Diego Loyal reporter and see if we can get some insight into this team that we don't frankly know that much about, other than their record and who their coach isn't. I don't even know who their coach is. I guess I could look that up in 2 seconds, but I haven't done it. But
just log into AOL and you can have the internet at your fingertips.
Right, exactly. But Mark, thank you for doing this. It was short notice, and so thanks for filling in for Aaron. I should say thank you on behalf of our sponsors, Full Pull Wines and Watson's Counter. And as always, I got to give a plug to our Substack, which we really appreciate people reading. We usually put out like 2 newsletters a week, in addition to all the podcasts. And it's the paid subscribers of our Substack that are making it worthwhile for us to start recording all the time now. We're putting out like 3 or 4 episodes a week, which is just crazy. We used to put out 2 a month last year. So I hope people are appreciating all this extra content that's being force-fed to them like cattle. I guess I'm getting really dark here. So anyway, that said, I'm Jeremiah Shan, signing off on behalf of Mark Kastner and Lickett. This is No Sadietis. Remember, you'll never yet alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.